Leatherskin, a Hearth and Harvest story by Julie Cox. Juno didn't know when the machine awoke, when consciousness stole into its curling yellow springs, its singing hinges and hot, hissing pistons. There was no singular moment of change, a time that was definitely before, undeniably after. Like any creation, any child, he was not what she had intended to make. Like many creators, she loved him all the more for it. It started with the arthritis in her fingers. The cold invaded her bones with its icy tendrils, making them pop and ache. She was a metal worker, a builder, so she built herself a solution. The machine, when she pronounced it complete, pleased her. The system of pulleys and levers struck with a strength and precision she no longer possessed. As its attachments and settings grew more complex, she came to rely on it for any real application of force, and her work was better than it had ever been. With higher quality work came a greater quantity of work as well. She found herself exhausted from hauling in coal and wood, moving the large raw metal pieces, working the bellows. Her eyesight began to fail, her hands shook, and the tiny details of her work faltered. Her solution was, again, to build, to expand the machine. She added a hydraulic system with a miniature white-hot engine at its heart, shining brass gears with delicate little teeth, contracting and relaxing pulleys and pivoting joints. When it became necessary for the machine to move outdoors, she had to rebuild the door frame, for it was now indeed enormous. Too enormous. In expanding her creation, she made it clunky, inefficient. She miniaturized, combined redundant functions and systems, revised and reworked and rebuilt. Instead of growing, the machine now shrank into itself, becoming dense. There was no wasted space between its dizzyingly complex components. More and more, the machine began to resemble a person. She didn't intend it, the design and purpose demanded it. The multiple refining tools were better arranged into pivoting flexible digits and required an opposed gripping component, fingers and a thumb, though more numerous, complex, and adjustable. The common joints upon which they pivoted, bent, and worked became hands. She put them on an extending adjustable length, arm. The machine's mobility was limited on wheels, especially in the rocky countryside. She built a system of stabilizing units, legs. The initial 6 legs were too large, too difficult to coordinate, to balance. 4 legs, then as the balancing components improved, 2 legs with multiple flex points. A strong, ribbon-closed central torso to house the steam engine, now miniaturized as much as possible, supplying the energy for the brass and copper machine. Function demanded form, and that form was humanoid. As the machine's shape grew more familiar, its lack of a head became more dissonant with the rest of its shape. Instinctively, she looked for a face above its shoulders. Its absence was a void she yearned to fill, but as a being driven by logic, she could not reconcile with herself the creation of a head with neither brain nor senses. She couldn't make it see or hear, smell or taste. Why create what in a person was a housing of the senses when the machine was devoid of sensation? The impossible again became necessary as she needed the machine to respond to voice and gesture instead of hand-guided commands. She had to give it a way to experience its world. The answer came one morning as she bent over the fire, absently watching a few slices of bacon pop and sizzle in the grease. It came all at once, as powerful ideas tend to do, and her breakfast burned over the fire as she rushed to scratch the plan for their optical and aural inputs with charcoal on the wall. Later, she would never be able to explain exactly how she did what she did. She would call it a moment of divine inspiration, and perhaps it was, for when she fit the head on them and turned them on for the first time, she felt as if a trickle of icy water had run down her back. She was sure, when she looked into those artificial eyes, something in there was looking back at her. Outside her home, beyond her packed dirt yard, the other humans with whom she lived whispered about her. She noticed, but did not mind. She knew why they murmured to each other, and she dismissed them. She didn't need them. She had her machine. They did almost all the work now, and she worked on them. In trying to make her work easier, she had produced her best creation, her life's greatest achievement. But while they were a joy to behold, the brass metal of their body was hard, and either too cold or too hot. So she learned to work leather, just for them, so she could more safely touch them. She tooled the tanned hides with intricate designs, dyed them green and brown and tan, and stitched them with fine, tight sinew. She wrapped the skin around his brass body and punched holes in the plates of his joints to attach them. She oiled the leather and polished the brass diligently, lovingly, so that the soot and muck of their work slid off him as it did her skin. When winter came, she didn't stoke the fire higher. She laid down next to her machine, her head on the leather padding of his arm, and curled up in the radiant warmth of his engine. The cold could not reach her arthritic bones now. He arched around her like a parent protecting a small child, and he rested too. At least it seemed that he did. On the days she took him into town with her, he grew withdrawn. By the next day he would be back to normal, so she didn't think anything of it. Then she left him behind one day, and he was alone. So was she. She did not realize until she was most of the way down the road that she had not been without him for many years. It had seemed so natural to have him with her. That day she was distraught and hurried through her business distracted and unaware. When she got home, she laid her head with relief against his shoulder, stroked him, and told him how she missed him. The machine put a metal hand on hers. In his uncertain steam voice, a hiss and a shudder of gears, he said, "Juno." It was not long after his first word that Juno found him up before her, packing tools and oil and coal. She asked him what he was doing, but she knew. He was leaving. She crossed her arms and tried to stiffen her face, but she began to cry. Here was her whole life about to walk away from her. He tried to comfort her. Worse, he pitied her. She tore away from him and ran, out of the house, out of the garden, to the edge of the woods, where she crouched in the heather and wept. He found her there, his steam-hissing joints in long morning shadow announcing his presence before his low, soft voice could reach her. He picked her up and rocked her in his leather-clad arms, and he sang. But he still left. When he finally started down the road, she did not stop him, did not cry. She only ran after him once to tuck brass polish, leather oil, and a soft, clean cloth into his pack. When she turned and went back to her home, she closed the door. She did not even watch him disappear over the hills. She stayed in her room, and for days she neither slept nor ate. Then she got up. She cleaned herself, dressed, made food. She began to work. Not on another machine, on something else, anything else, even though her long-neglected muscles and joints cried out in pain. It was a long time before she finished, but then she had the rest of her life, so many long, empty days to fill. Juno was old, so old, and did not work any longer. She went to see the caravans when they came to town to ask if anyone had seen her machine. They would remember him if they had, but always it was the same. Shaking heads, no light of recognition in their foreign eyes. They came in their covered wagons with their splash-colored draft ponies and little wooden toys, spinning tales of faraway places and heathen customs, magic and work beyond wonder, none of which compared with what she had made with her own hands. This time she did not even go to see them. Instead, she took her staff and walked down to the edge of the forest, where he had held her that last time. It was hard to get there now, both because of her own failing strength and the failing path, which was, each season, harder to find in the encroaching brush. Each whistle in the leaves and grass around her sounded like his voice, the clank and creak sound of his body moving. Today, she heard the hiss of steam stronger than ever before. No, she really heard it this time. She hurried up the path over the low garden wall, louder, louder, and there was her machine, her beautiful brass and copper leather-clad machine with his luminescent eyes and steam-hiss voice. He was different. He had made changes of his own to his body, but he was still the same, still hers. She ran to him, clung to him, not caring if she brushed against a hot wire or a greasy joint. She cried and laughed, and so did he. He could laugh. When she pulled away to look at him, she noticed something over his shoulder. It was another machine, made much the same as herself, but from a white metal material and soft, pale blue leather. He motioned to this new machine, and it came forward. Unlike him, there was no hint of a soul in it, no gentle intelligence in its eyes. This creation was not alive, an empty shell. It was for her, he said, but she shook her head. She didn't want another one, a replacement. He too said no, shaking his head, that head she had created under such consternation, such inspiration. No, he said, this was not for her to use, to do things for her. It was for her. Then she understood. He laid her out in the heather under the sun, laid out the blue and white golem. Juno closed her eyes. The wind moved, the sun warmed, and there came a change, a shift. She opened her eyes again and saw the world in all different ways. Not only light, but now force, moisture, vector, and scent. She saw waves of pollen, tides of insects, the powerful energy of the trees giving and taking from the soil and the sky. She witnessed the life lights of animals darting through the bright shadows of the forest. The machine held out his hand, and she took it. She closed her white metal blue leather hand upon his, and he helped her to stand. He held her close in her wondrous new form that fit to his because it was made to do so. He would show her the world as she could never have seen it before. For them, there would always be time. Recorded by Jennifer McCown. Text copyright 2018 by Julie Cox. Audio recording copyright 2020 by Julie Cox.